what this is about is I believe in actionable tips, things you can use right away. And so I want to keep this within the time limit. But I believe the future isn't about us. It's about our capacity to connect with people extremely unlike us around sweet spots of mutual benefit. And few people do that. I believe next to using your main talent, it's your capacity to work well with people who are quite different than you. And if you look at the floor now, and then look at the walls, and then listen to the ambient noise, then smell your partner. You're not doing that. So what I'm suggesting is all these things affect how we get along. So I want to give you some very concrete ideas from the behavioral research about what makes us connect or not. So please do shake hands with someone near you. Introduce your name, but just leave it at that. Now this was a conniving thing, because here's what happens. Now watch his body right there. See as it continues? The middle part of his body is turning. When the middle part of your body turns, you actually get more in sync with somebody else. When you're walking, you're more in sync than when you're sitting still. You instinctively know that. Now when you're working on people different than you, they don't act right, like you. And the more you physically act similar sooner, the more likely you are to get along. Now you'll notice the way you acted was how you present yourself to the world. Some people initiate, some people respond. It's always interesting when you get two of the same kind. Some people will sort of instinctively take over, some will clarify. There's no right or wrong. You just remember this. The only way to act is the way I act, and we all instinctively feel that way. So the more different than you look than me in the beginning, because most of the people I work with don't look at all like me, the more important it is that you get in sync sooner, literally in sync. And ironically, the simple act of shaking hands is a mirroring movement. For those of you who know NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, it's been proven wrong by several good studies, but one thing that is correct is when we get in sync, like the first 6 months you're in love, you're more likely to get along. So I'm going to hop along here and give you a set of steps, one right after the other, that relate to how we communicate to connect. That's vastly different on how much you think of me. The future is in that connectivity. Mutuality matters. So I'm going to go through some specifics. Look down at the floor, for example. I'm going to start backwards, so to speak. The more patterns there are, or sounds, the more we get agitated, the less we remember, and the less we like each other. Now, how vivid is that? I'm working at a hotel chain in Europe. Instead of having the long check-in counter, we had curves and round areas at the front desk. So curves make people get along better than right angles. Secondly, we had the people stand not like this, but just like this much of a difference. When you're at an angle, you get along better than when you're facing somebody directly. Now you know when a bunch of guys are hanging out, they'll instinctively go like this, and they do the fig leaf. They'll do something, but they instinctively rarely face off. And women, we tend to come up and look directly and get engaged in talking. And men, when they see us doing that, sometimes will instinctively do the same thing. But in fact, we don't connect as well when we're in a face-off, just like the animal kingdom, the rest of it. So even a slight angle, or sitting at right sides on the table rather than across the table, you're more likely to get along. Fondness goes towards asymmetry. So when you look at your body right now, just mentally look down. For those of us that like this, it's not as easy to look at as people that are doing what he's doing right here. Now I'm going to get real personal, but I won't embarrass you. There are 5 people in this room who have something that's really golden, and he's one of them. They have what's called a genial face and repose. I don't. I've worked on mine, and it's better than it used to be. But a genial face and repose is not the face we had when we put on our face when we shook hands. And this is vital. I'll tell you why. Because genial means that we look approachable. He has a very different style, but he actually does too. You too probably hear stuff that's none of your business. People just start talking at you. So there's different ways it happens, and it's increasingly rare. And here's one of the reasons I think so. Could you pretend that you have your smartphone in your hand, please, and look down for messages just for a moment. And then you look up. See, we tend to look down with a slight frown, but at least not a smile. And we're looking up without changing our expression. So the younger you are and the more digitally attached you've been earlier, the more you look, and we don't know it. How strong is this? There's a hospital in Boston where they have a preemie ward, and it suddenly dawned on me. I live in Sausalito, in the northern part of the county, on Thursday nights, walking down around Santa Fe. I'm going to say this carefully. There's a lot of rich people walking around, not smiling, looking at their devices, not a lot of flow, and then there's all the Hispanic folks. I'm just making a sweeping generalization. Who's talking, who's touching, who's warm, who's fluid? Who has the least money in general with some? So I said to the preemie ward, what if we hired 9 women, 45 or older, who were born in Mexico, and had them stand next to their nurses in the preemie ward? They have more of a flow, they have more of a physical voice and emotional changes in their face, musical voice as well, and do nothing else. And it was a rare time because the head of the unit was into being experimental. 4 months later, what I hoped would happen did, but something unexpected as well happened. There was a 23% increase in the speed of recovery of the preemie babes who looked up and saw the warm smiling faces, the musical voice, and the flowing motions. But the second part, if you haven't read the book called Connected, fabulous book written about 3 years ago, and I'm going to start suggesting books. Our behavior affects other people to the 3rd degree. Not only were the babies doing better, but the nurses were emulating the behavior of the people they're around, so they were getting more like it. And the nurses had a higher perception of each other's talents and camaraderie. It was changing them without even saying anything. So it's pretty powerful. And see, I get this serious face on because I love this stuff. How many of you grew up shy? Look around. Shy. It's so popular now, ever since Susan wrote that brilliant book, Quiet. Said, oh yeah, I'm introverted too. I love sitting at a table when people are eagerly talking for hours about being introverted and not talking much. But I've always been interested in how we connect or not. So everything I'm telling you is based on behavior. Now turn back to your partner that you shook hands with, and in one sentence only. My mother washed out my mouth for saying this, but I'm going to ask you to try it. One sentence, tell your partner one thing you remember, and then shut up. Shut up. Can you stick to one sentence? Now, at least 5 of you may not. Turn to each other, whoever's closest to that wall, one sentence, one thing you remember from what I said, and then the other person, and then quiet. One thing you remember.
Put on a smiley face when you look up from your mobile device.
See, the strange thing is in our culture, we tend to chat. Chat and chat some more. It's the rare person who can actually be still and absorb and then listen to the other person. Those are the kind of people I want for my partners. Why? Because you become conscious of what you said. You get more done faster. It doesn't mean you become robotic, but you become a lot more grounded and connected. And we're becoming much less so in our culture. We're more likely not to have a thread to the conversation, more likely to not answer a question directly. Well, let me give you a little background first. That's underbrush. We're more likely, especially if we're smart and know a lot, to give generalizations instead of specifics. The specific proves the general conclusion doesn't do the reverse. 4 years ago in the St. Francis, I'm going to do something now that'll show you 3 different tips about connecting. A man walked on stage. It was a conference of stock investors, analysts, and it was to review healthcare and medical companies. So they're all wearing black, talking twice as fast as I do, alpha male and female, driving fast, 20 minutes. This one man got up, walked on the stage, but he didn't walk on as fast. He didn't walk on as fast as the others. He rolled up his suit sleeve and then his shirt sleeve, and then he pointed at the patch. He said, see this patch? When it goes in the market, you'll feel the effects of it faster than a Porsche can go from 0 to 90. So first of all, his body was a billboard. He was saying the message with his body. And it made it more memorable, especially because it was in 3 dimensions. Porsche was 5 years ago, so that was the aspiration. He became the most quoted person at the conference because people eat it up, even if they weren't paying attention. And to me, the signal is when I'm speaking at a conference and I ask the waiters afterwards, do you remember anything I said? Because if they remember and it's not part of their job, that's a sign that was worthwhile. So be the most frequently quoted person. Use the cue called compare to what? Compare your main point to something else that has the traits that are your differentiating traits in that point. And if you sit down to try to figure out what that is, it's hard because your mind goes blank. But as you drive through life and you're doing things, you sidelong glance and think, why did that get to my attention? What's the trait I'm trying to find a comparison with? And you're more likely to find it. Now the other conniving thing is I said, tell your partner one of the things that you heard. By thinking about it, saying it out loud, you're more likely to remember it. Those of you who write, even if you never look at it again, you remember about double the amount of information. So, in 3 dimensions motion, compared to what? Body's a billboard. Those are some of the ways that we make our message stick. From the inside out, our goal is to get very specific about what we want people to remember. I wrote some columns about it, Huffington Post and Harvard Business Review. So if you look up my name and you look up the words that I say that most interest you, there might be a column on it that relates. Now, any wild guesses how long it takes to form a first impression these days? An American, yes, tell me.
3 seconds.
You're absolutely right, dead on. Darn, I thought someone would at least say 6 seconds. You're a cynical person.
Just said it in the other. We listen.
To build on that, you know what they say, we should always make a good first impression? And some people are beginning to believe that we're becoming a more narcissistic culture because we're giving evidence of it. Does that ring any bells? Well, the most important thing when you first meet somebody isn't how they feel about you. Of course you know where I'm going. It's how they feel about themselves when they're around you. If they don't like the way they feel when they're around you, they will project onto you. I'm saying this slowly because this is something I have to remind myself all the time. They will project onto you the qualities they don't like in other people. Oh, they're arrogant. Oh, they're pushy. Whatever the thing is they don't like. Conversely, but not as possible, if they like the way they are when they're around you, they will see in you the qualities that they most like in other people, whether or not you have them. Now, they will go out of their way to sabotage things on which they're working to damage you more intensely than if they like you. So imagine we had a conversation and we're going along and there's 5 things you kind of liked about me and what was going on, and then there's 1 thing you didn't. That's what happens. This is my version of a graph in real time. So whenever something's going awry, we have to stop, restart, even actually say, let's talk later, do something to change it. Because we will spiral up into resentment faster than we will into liking. Now I'm bouncing around on purpose because I want you to think there are many cues that we don't think about. Some of the books I'm going to suggest, for example, I believe there are high-performing psychopaths. They're not all serial killers. And if you haven't read Kevin Dutton's book about the wisdom of psychopaths, ironically, when I was reading it, Richie Davidson is one of my heroes. There's 9 behavioral scientists I like a lot. He's the one who's worked on startle response, psychopathy, ways that we connect subliminally. We both found that monks and psychopaths tend to be intuitive, and they also have among the lowest lack of startle response. You know, the studies where you shoot a shotgun and there's no startle, monks do meditation, and psychopaths have less reaction. Also, psychopaths in some way, in the broadest term, are empathic. Empathic meaning they're able to sense what you're feeling. Some of them do it for the greater good, executives, certain soldiers, some others. Others do it for manipulation, which is a broad term. I'm just asking you to consider there's a lot more for us to learn about ourselves. Now give your best social face again to your patient partner and say, since we last spoke, here's one thing I remember, and then I'm going to shut up. Go. See how hard it is to be quiet?
And let's start by
I'm going to give you 2 more sections of things here, but I truly ask you, you think it's being sociable, but in a way it's not. It's choosing to stay at a certain level. So I don't mean you're still and you look at each other and you go, or something. But there is a way you listen for a moment and you respond sometimes as an option. Now this is called inside out for communicating to connect. The more you're clear specifically about what you most want to happen in the next situation, whether you love someone, hate them, or just met them, this is true. The more I'm clear about something specific I'd like to happen, I'm more clear about how that can change. You're actually more flexible because you've got a starting point. Howard Rafa, one of my mentors from long ago, said it's easier to negotiate with a jerk who knows what they want than a nice person who doesn't. So when you gain clarity, then you can say, no, it's this I want, not it's this instead. So once I'm clear when I'm approaching my husband or my business partner or someone who's hired you to speak or work with you, the more I get clear what I want out of it going in, I'm more able to listen to them rather than planning what I want to say. I'm more able to make choices. Secondly, and this is rare, less than 9% of people, and some people believe it's less than 3, actually communicate to connect. Since I know what my goal is, I'm more likely to be able to first speak to your interest, then how it relates to mine, and then what we have in common. So I write these 2 columns, and I'll tell you this is a hot button that brings out a very unattractive side to me, so I'll use this as an example. I get an average of 300 queries asking me would I like to write a column about, clearly knowing nothing about to write about. I mean, some of them I should keep. In fact, my assistant started keeping one because he wants to do a book of parody, and telling me why I want to write about their column, or write about their topic. So they're all about them. Most pitches are still, let me tell you about my business so. But even if you have a set-up sentence, and you say, because of your work in, or because of this, or this, or this, we may have something in common, I think, or I may be able to help you, or whatever it is. And then say, let me tell you why, and see if I'm on track. So that's the setup of the conversation. Something about you, how it relates to what my interests are, and then what we might do. Am I on track? Then you're inviting participation. The second hot button is, oh, can you help me become a public speaker? Which apparently is a real hot thing to want to do. Will you help me? Help me, help me, help me. Now, one of my heroes is a guy named Adam M. Grant. He wrote Give and Take. He lives it. He says, givers are among the least successful and the most successful. He's an influencer writer on LinkedIn. He really uses behavioral research to turn into actionable insights. He says, givers are among the worst and the most productive. Some givers give and get resentful because they don't give back. Other givers give but take care of themselves first, often chunk their giving, and they build strong bonds with people, instigating the desire to reciprocate. Guess which sex tends to give, and get resentful when they don't get it back? Thank you.
Not a lot of box.
We have a 50% chance of being right. So we all have something to learn, is all I'm suggesting. We do. And the pattern that we do makes such a difference. So far I've given you 20 tips with things related to them. What I want to do is I can talk about faces and lying. I can talk about patterns. I can talk about behaviors that cause conflict. But I'd rather take these next few minutes and what pops up for you, if you have a specific question you'd like to ask, that it answers something there. I have a site called Say It Better, and you have the 2 columns to look at. But based on something I said, or about human behavior, human connection, do you have a question? Yes. Say about faces and lying? Yes. All of us lie, it's just a matter of how much. And there's 2 books out, and experts who say they can detect lying. and they can't. I work with the Secret Service, who's much better than the FBI. FBI and police in general are slightly worse or slightly better than the average public, by the way, in detecting lying, which is kind of uncomfortable. But the Secret Service have been very good, because what they do, this is the first part, is they are taught to see what doesn't fit in this picture, rather than always looking, are you guilty or not? Sets the paradigm. They also, the Secret Service is able to open up their peripheral vision. But there's one thing you can tell. The only person who's been an expert that's been confirmed is Paul Ekman, E-K-M-A-N, 30 years ago. His books on telling lies in faces are great. For example, we have a fake smile on us most of the time. Could you slightly elevate your eyebrow and turn to your partner? Slightly elevate. Now, if you do it that much, it looks like... But the ironic thing is when it's just ever so slight, which takes practice. Actually, that's kind of interesting. You actually look more caring. Even if you can't make a genuine smile, a slight upward look, it does take practice. It makes you look more open. Now, detect lying. There's two ways you can increase the chances by almost double. That is, if I say, suppose I stole something from our office, and because I was going to start my own consulting business, and you came in the next day and I had broken the lock so it looked like someone had broken in. And you say, Kare, somebody's broken in. Really? What'd they take? My timing and duration of my response will be off. Your gut instinct can tell. When do I respond? Too soon or too late? And how much do I talk? We fake that. Even veteran liars have trouble with the timing and the duration of the expression. So is there another specific area that matches yours interest?
Wait, can you just elaborate a little bit on...
Say that again?
Can you just explain how the response is different if you are lying?
If I ask the question and I think you're going to be lying,
Yeah.
I note instinctively, when they answered, did they answer too quickly? Or did they take too long to start it?
Okay, but they don't tend to always be slower or faster. Or...
Everybody has a rhythm. And if you don't take it to your mind, but you watch your gut, you know the rhythm of somebody. And if in your gut tells you they answered too quickly, or they waited too long, or they usually talk about this much and it's different. So just, I know this sounds odd, but it's amazing how much you can detect. They may be lying to cover up something or to feel bad because they don't want to tell you something. But when they're telling deceiters, they see it, if that's the way it is.
So gestures or body language can vary so much from culture to culture, right?
Very much,
How do you
yes.
reconcile that, and how do you...
Well, there's one near universal, because there's very few, and that is when gestures are lower, slower, and less, especially at first. Lower, slower, and less. Remember Gypsy Rosely, for those of you in the U.S., stripper? She said, anything worth doing well is worth doing slowly. Now, I don't know what she meant by that, but I think it's a good way for you to remember. Fewer gestures at first. It's also good for introverts and extroverts to do this. And one way to know it for across cultures is I remember motivational speakers used to come in and say, "Good morning!" And so they started energy at a different place, which made them be more different than the audience and less connected. Just like police and marital intervention, way back in the days when that was one of the most dangerous things for police to do before all the big guns came in. Knock on the door and try to separate people. Now let's not get so upset, which is oil and water, telling them they're upset, and try to push them apart and they talk and, hi, calm now, let's not get... Instead, if they match the intensity but with warmth in their voice and gradually slowed everything down. But the rest cross-culture is one of the most difficult things, and I think that's part of the reason you brought it up. And Americans and some others tend to want people to smile more, and to have cheery pre-talk. There's a book called Digital... Sorry, I just got a new book and I liked it, but the first one was digital, so cross-cultural. And so it's coming out next week. So if you look up for books that are coming out next week, digital, it's not digital natives, but it's about cross-cultural communication. Specific that interests you, is there another topic? And then
Any tip on communicating in a hostile environment or a situation?
Communicate in a what environment?
Hostile environment? Or
Hostile environment. Hostile meaning everybody's hostile? Or
I walk into a meeting where 4 people have negative opinions, for example. Or,
negative opinions of you or of each other?
no, of me or the things that I present.
Well, one thing to do is, it's interesting. When you feel hostility, that's when you want to be able to relax, and it's the same as when you put a smile on your face, it makes you feel better. The when you look genial and understated and ignore it, you can choose to ignore the evidence you want to and focus on what you want. So you act as if they're looking forward to seeing you and you're genial, but you don't get overly cheery. And I always believe it's good to sincerely, specifically praise them for some specific action, sincere, specific action. And give them control, which is the way you keep control to some degree. Say, we're here to discuss this. Is there a certain way you'd like to proceed? So then they're in control and choose how, and you get to respond. So that way, you're showing deference, but you're not losing your own control of your space. It's too general a thing otherwise, because the nature of hostility happens in so many different ways. It's hard to clarify more than that. You have to see it. By the way, I'll say this too. I wrote a description of a seminar program a decade ago, and it was the most popular that the training group had. And it's not because I did a good job, but because of the topic, dealing with difficult people. Now let me tell you what I learned from it. So the training company would teach people to go train on that, and they get 3 or 4 techniques before breaks when they want to push people to buy books. And so you had 3 or 4 techniques in the morning, and they'd come up to the trainer. By the way, trainers got burnt out on this more than anything else. And they say, you know, when you describe that jerk, I have somebody just like that, they do that, I just don't. Well, of the things so far you've heard this morning, which one do you want to try on? Well, I can't believe that they could, and we spill over and we keep on talking about the jerk. It embeds in our brain, and it becomes the thing we're on. And it takes an average of 3 times to get them to get off the hook. Say, well, which one do you want to try? Well, I don't know. So the way we shut down is pretty strong. But one thing, and I call it defensive driving, to choose how you act rather than reacting, is to learn what your 2 or 3 hot buttons are. And this is not easy. So in a class, I said, you know, you'll speak in generalizations. If I ask you the thing that most bugs you, you'll say something like, they're arrogant, they're pushy, they're whatever. They're general conclusions we draw based on specific behavior, and we all have different things that really push our buttons. When you know specifically what the things are that bother you, you can see further cars ahead and see it coming. You can plan specific things that you want to do. So I just want to do one last piece here. I believe one of the most important things for us to learn, and it's the nature of power, and it doesn't cost us much except being conscious. And that is how to be more frequently quoted. Because when we say things that resonate, we create the playing field on which the situation is viewed. We determine how people respond to it and act on it. So I call it the A.I.R approach. I'm trying to do in the rhythm of next door. R. And I'm going to give you these 3 simple parts because they're simple to say and they're hard to do. But they're easier than anything else I've found. So if you want people to remember what you say, these are the 3 elements. And I'll go backwards. Relevance. How relevant is what you're saying to that person at that time? To the situation you respond to. How relevant is it? The middle one, we're just getting besotted with in our culture, and we see it everywhere. Interestingness. We're just drawn to things that are interesting, even if it doesn't help us in our work or life. We're just distracted by it, for good and for bad. So the threshold for what's interesting has gone up. So you want to think of the most interesting example or compared to that strikes them. And it could be the rule of 3, 3 unlikely allies, 3 unexpected things. It could be humor, it could be awe. It's a book called Contagious by Jonah Berger. He'll give you ideas on that. Contagious. For example, he says, compare what you're doing to something people do frequently. So Kit Kat, for example, which is the candy, apparently, more than having an influencer or celebrity, they compared it to coffee. Say, on a Kit Kat and coffee break, So they associated their brand with the behavior that a lot of their market did from analytics. So it's sort of prosaic, but it stuck and it boosted their sales 30%. So how do you, when I did the Porsche, what's the comparison? What's the metaphor? Even if you think blue is not as interesting as cobalt blue, the more concrete you can get, the better. So, A is actionable. Are you inherently giving something that people will want to act on right away? Act on right away. The sooner they take some small action, the more likely they'll take a second. And if they take 3 actions in quick succession, imagine on the website or in a store or in a meeting, say there's just one thing, let's try now, get them to do it. So one way to put this in context is if I was to come up to you and say, you've been such a good client of ours for a while, I want to take just 5 minutes of your time, if you don't mind, to help us improve our service, and I want to give you this gift as appreciation for it. So I give a gift and it doesn't have the company name on it, it's something I know you'll like. So I set it up, I said the amount of time, and it's limited, and there's a motion, and it's such reciprocal, and say, what specifically did you most like about our product? Even if I said specific, I know this wouldn't happen to you, but other people, they'd say something general. So you're nodding, by the way, there's some people who start to nod slowly, and they were the ones that are most well-liked and got the most data. Nodding slowly, like you're on Quaaludes. So whenever they say something, and you're acknowledging it with your pad or your pen, your smart pad or your pen, you're writing it down. They did better, because I show respect. People rarely show, they ask questions and they don't remember it. But then the follow-up question is, could you give me an example of that? Then they get specific. What you're doing is training them to be a better salesperson for your product their way, because they come up with a specific example. And if you do 10 of those, you're going to find out what you thought was the most important reason people bought is not, in fact, always what they find valuable. And your response was so helpful, I wonder if we could use it to share with other people. See, then his name will be better known. Now, that's not what happens in a lot of businesses. If I was to ask you, what do you think of our company? You know what happens? Because that's the way an opinion poll goes, right? This is what happens. That means one thing bothered me. So the very action of asking people what they thought means it embeds more deeply what I dislike and reduces the impact. It doesn't solidify the part of the good part. So what I just did is part of a thing that we can do all day. The instinct to reciprocate came out of Robert Cialdini's original research. When I give you something, your instinct is to reciprocate. Did any of you get on the airplane and they go by with these things saying, would you fill out a questionnaire telling us what you think? Well, it was going on for about 3 years, and I thought, why would I bother doing that? Besides, I couldn't write the things that I'm thinking on there. You could email them, which I did last week. So what I'm talking about is there's threads of things that are very specific, but I firmly believe to cover the arc of what we've done. What is your main talent? Can you say it clearly and specifically? How many people do you work with regularly who are completely different than you? Age, sex, ethnicity, and size. I worked on both Obama's campaigns as a coach to the thought leaders, but the person who brought me on was a life changer. They didn't understand him, so they said, you come with them. That was the first campaign where nobody understood that analytics geeks were really helpful. And they didn't pay much attention to them. And I fell in love with the cluster of 15 of them. It took us so long to even be able to understand each other. One at age 27 was so happy to be working so hard in the last campaign that he killed her and had a heart attack. And he's the one that brought me in. When people for the first time get so imbued that they actually get to use their best talents, it gets them out of whack. And to this day, I find it so disturbing. But I do believe where we learn to be flexible. We don't have what's called a filter bubble. There's a book on that. Where we hang out with people like us, so we filter out stuff. But you have your domain you're well known in. Like, I'm a journalist. I love journalists and like military people. That, we make and keep agreements with all the rest of civilians. Well, I have a lot of friends in those two sectors. Those are sectors that really make me happy. But I ask you as well, it's like the America's Cup for balance. Do you have 3 other domains where there's some people in them you just genuinely respect You barely understand them. They often don't act right. And you kid each other about it, but you've got connections and friendships. And you cultivate, you keep them. It's not quid pro quo. That's where the future is for us as individuals. Best talents, knowing a domain well, having good friends and others. I can't count the number of times when I wanted to know something without my fingerprints on it, and I asked them, or they asked me, or I helped co-create something for them. So that's under the rubric of say it better. So I'd like to take just 3 more questions, because we're close out of time, I think. So we're out of time, right? Oh, we're over, then we should just stop. Sorry about that. Thank you very much.